It was AOL.
AOL.
Yeah.
AOL. Yeah.
That was Prodigy. That was way cooler than you guys.
Then CompuServe for a little bit after that.
Actually, it was Juno for a little bit too.
Oh, also had a Juno E. This is free email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't go wrong.
Welcome back. It's episode 10 of the Radial Ventures podcast. We made it. We did at least 10 of these now. Today, we're talking about age tech, which we sometimes refer to as silver tech. 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day. And it's really the first generation to age online. They're sitting on $80 trillion of wealth. And today, we're going to dig into a little bit of why certain technology is going the way that it's going, what's broken about some of the solutions that exist out there, and what the second wave of senior tech or silver tech actually starts to look like. We've got a company that we're building, at least one company that we're building at Radial Ventures in this space, maybe a couple more. For folks in our age group, for a lot of us, this is our parents. And for some of us that are maybe a little bit younger or a little bit lucky, it's our grandparents who are maybe still around.
I think there's a couple items you mentioned that are important to highlight. One, that there's a term called the sandwich generation that refers to people essentially in their mid 30s to their mid 40s that are taking care of two sides. They're sandwiched by children they have to take care of and, their parents, the elderly. And I think that's where we look at and see like what kind of technology opportunities are there to make that better, easier, more seamless, because anyone who hits our age feels this instantly, where there's a stress of like taking care of both sides of that equation. And that's some of the stuff that we're looking at or trying to solve with Ask Felix, the company that you mentioned. I think there's also just let's just walk through as well how we actually got here. We look at people who are older and think they don't use tech, like generally speaking. And I think what you mentioned is very important, where like this is the first generation that was native to the current like move of technology. Like my grandparents, your grandparents did not bank digitally. They did not like get on the internet. Whereas our parents really were the ones, especially in our cases, where like they bought that first computer. They, got a Prodigy or AOL account or whatever it was for us for that first one. What was your first?
It was AOL.
AOL.
Yeah.
AOL. Yeah.
That was Prodigy. That was way cooler than you guys.
Then CompuServe for a little bit after that.
Actually, it was Juno for a little bit too.
Also had a Juno E. This is free email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't go wrong.
Right.
Still have free email today. But yeah, so that they're the generation that actually like did all of this and have throughout the years. They've gone through all the same social media platforms, although they seem to gravitate towards one of them, Facebook, that the rest of us have moved on from. And I think like that, it creates again opportunities, but also problems that we have to look at now of like, now what happens as someone ages or gets older, as like things like dementia set in or just slowing down, like your guards are down. And now like an area that was already full of fraud and scams is now like exacerbated because all of their stuff and all of their information is available. And, they're just like blind clicking through Facebook posts. So I think like that's where we have to like think about and look at what are we building to make this safer, not only for our children, which gets all the press and publicity, but now you have older folks who, control 80% or $80 trillion of wealth that, have to be protected. And like, what are we doing to solve that problem? And that's some of what we're looking at with Ask Felix. But I think in general, this is a concern we all have.
Well,
it's an area of technology. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's tricky too, because they're using it, but they're not good at managing, these different online tools. And so, yeah, they have email and maybe they're doing their web banking and they have other stuff, but they still need you to manage it a lot of times, or at least you're at least tech support, right? And I think there's still, when you think through building stuff for this demographic, you actually have to build the products for our generation, but to service the older generation who, for all intents and purposes, aren't going to be the ones managing and leveraging it. So it's like you almost have two different customer use cases that you need to build for.
Sure. It's a category too that's very personal in people's lives in a way that I think other things that we work on and think about in our daily lives, you think of your email as personal. I'm not sure people think of their Facebook account as being as personal as something that's going to help them manage their finances with their kids, or help them manage their long-term care, or help them manage, their living situation. There's a lot of trust that needs to be baked into these tools, and it's a very sort of personal family thing in a way that a lot of software isn't yet. The data exhaust problem, I think, is a good one. So you want to dig into that?
Yeah, tee it up.
All right. So I think one great place to start that's on my mind already as a dad, and I see this with my grandfather, who I'm lucky enough to still have around. He's in his early 90s. And my mother and father, I'm lucky enough to still have around, right? And they have their phones. They all have thousands of images and videos that they've taken over the years. My grandfather has put together and scanned in all the old photographs, all the old pictures, plus everything he's taken on his digital cameras from the beginning of when there were digital cameras all the way to today. And so we have a situation where, for a lot of us, all of those videos, all those pictures, they're not in an old box in grandma's house anymore. They're on phones and they're on computers. They're on cloud accounts. They may or may not be backed up off of an iPhone or an Android device. And so there's a legacy of all of the memories and, all of those sort of precious artifacts that we have in our families that are not hanging around in a workshop or a garage on a videotape anymore. And there are at real risk of just disappearing or losing access to those things.
This isn't just older folks too, right? Like I have 100,000 images on my phone, which I think there's a whole question around what has happened there. Cause now like every mode of my children's lives have been documented. Like all of us have this thing where what is that going to be like for them? Like my dad had he did as an amateur photographer. There were lots of recordings, lots of things. It pales in comparison to the way kids today grow up. So I think that's a whole separate topic we could maybe talk about in a different podcast. But yeah, I mean, storing everything, like there's two problems you bring up. One is collecting all that information. So there's companies like Legacy Box and others that will, you ship all the tapes and all of the analog media you have, and they'll digitize it and then store it for you. I've actually used services like that, and a little expensive, but pretty cool what comes back. But now, like, how does that also get served up to you and your family in a nice and consumable way? Because I can't look through 100,000 images, and most of them are like the same pose. It's like, I want just the best one.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the problem I have with this is like Apple or Google ends up being the one that has to solve this if the images are in their library, because just moving them into another platform probably is not an investable business as much as people have tried. But I do think there's like a middle area or like a family tree sort of tool around sharing this stuff and like getting it all in one group area. Cause like, my uncle might have different content that I've never seen before of my grandparents that I'd want. And like, how do you start to like create that conversation and that product is interesting.
Yeah, I think having it across extended families is actually pretty interesting, because we had my great grandfather's book, and he had one book, and it was like with the family that's in New Jersey. And like it randomly they showed up and they're like, oh yeah, here's this book with all this interesting stuff that nobody knew about. It's like,
yeah. And I thought about it. So this is also bringing back some stuff, because I have a lot of ephemera of things. I'm looking at it now, but I have like also my family's items as well. Like I have a record player that my dad got for my mom when they got engaged because they met at a record store. So like there's more than just photos that would need to then be, essentially photographed or, but you could imagine a web application or a platform that like takes all of that. AI could look at it, learn what it is, and actually like annotate it a little bit. Like I have a lot of my grandfather's World War II notes and documents that could actually piece together. Now I've sometimes uploaded it to Claude or ChatGPT just to see like, what battle is this talking about? Or what is this likely talking about? Which creates again, like an interesting story that can be weaved through for a family, connecting multiple generations, not just, the silver tech area we were talking earlier. So this is another one that I like all this stuff a lot. And it's really just how is it a scalable, investable business?
Well, it seems like there's been a lot of people who've done this or at least played in this space before, whether it's kind of doing the storytelling or the videos or the interviews, but it almost seems like it's maybe one of those things that it's not a priority until it is. These different platforms have done, but you definitely do see people attempting it, but never, I guess, getting it mainstream for some reason.
I think, yeah, you bring up an interesting point, Nick, which is like the historical context for so much of our families, right? It gets kind of lost over time. I was telling just over this past weekend, telling someone else some stories of some of the older members of my family living in New York City, moving to Buffalo, right, and going through the Great Depression and those periods of time. That's something that's very accessible by some reasonably cheap AI models today, right, to help not just piece together the story of the individual person in your family who may have been in a war, but just the people who are living their lives and the context that they were living in, right? And in my story, there was other family members that moved to Niagara Falls at post-World War II, when Niagara Falls was really coming up. You got that period of time in the 40s and the 50s and technology innovation going on in that area, and just being able to set some of that understanding of the context that they live their lives in and tell that story a little bit. Is something that gets lost. And when I look at very old pictures of my family, my great-great-grandmother, or pictures of my great-grandmother when she was younger and raising my grandparents, or pictures of my parents, there's a lot of historical context and cultural context that's in those pictures or in those time periods that you don't really know about and understand. And when things get put into that, that's really where the history becomes interesting. But then for you as a person, that's your family, right? When it becomes your history becomes interesting.
Yeah.
And get some depth to it.
Right. I mean, you can really annotate a lot of it, make it interesting.
Sure.
Well, and so, I mean, it could also just be that the real goal is you're just building digital twins of everyone, right? And
digital twins with more, right? With more context, right? Knowing what was going on during the Great
Like
Depression,
digital
knowing
twins
what
of
was
the
going
dead?
on.
Is that
Yeah.
what you mean? I mean,
Yeah. Or
the
the
red-
living
yeah.
who then become dead,
So what fascinating. What's hard, I mean, I think the reason these things tend to fail, right, is that they're a lot of work. It's like a lot of librarian sort of like upkeep. Like you have to really be motivated to do that and then also pay for something. Like, what am I paying for at the end of the day when I look at something like this? Is it just like hosting storage, or is it something else entirely? Because it's a small group of people that would be looking at it. Even if you have a family of 50 people, how often are they actually like looking and interacting with this stuff? So there needs to be something more connected there.
Well,
To
I
make
mean,
it
what
work.
what if it is that digital twin? You can do voice, you can do text,
You could talk to them.
you just talk to them.
So there was I forgot which it was, whether it was a New Yorker or New York Times writer that did this with her, but it was with her. She was in her 30s and her husband had a podcast. So she took all the podcast recordings, turned it into a person or an AI voice she could talk to. It was a little creepy. Yeah, it did not make her feel any better or fix her grief. We'll say that. I think, yes, there is something fascinating about trying to connect all of those dots for folks. Ultimately, what is the purpose of doing that? Is it, if it's a recent, passing, is it dealing with grief, or is it more for, the great grandkids to be able to try to potentially interact with, their forebears? Is also interesting. Who pays for it and why? Or is it just ad based, to something we haven't heard or said in a long time? Because we know how that usually is not the solution.
It's part of your estate planning. It's a one-time fee.
I mean, maybe that's part of it. That's interesting too.
So I am seeing there is a talk to the dead category of products. So
Is that on Y Combinator? Is that their next category they're asking for pitches
that'll
on?
be next year's request for startups. Yeah.
Yeah, morbid but interesting.
Or you just create an agent of yourself that just pesters your children forever.
Right.
That can be fun. Ghost Dad, I'll call it.
Right. All right, so let's switch topics a little bit. Get into AI robotics in the home. I was sharing a little bit when we were preparing for this conversation. I have a robot that vacuums my floor in my house, and I'm looking at robots that might be mowing my lawn pretty soon. And we've all seen videos now of humanoid robots that are being worked on by companies like Tesla and Figure that can do the laundry, that can do the dishes, can do things around the house. And that's only going to get more and more prevalent and all the more necessary for this large group of aging population, that something that can help take care of the house can really extend the amount of time that they can live on their own and be independent. In the same way that self-driving vehicles will enable a category of people who can't drive, maybe due to their age, maybe because they're blind, or they have some other disability, right? Now they can be mobile in a way that's very cost effective and safe. And so in the home, having these AI robots around to help take care of them, I think is a massive category that we're already seeing these companies head towards. It's hardly a secret, but very much a silver tech play.
Yeah, there's a repackaging of it that you would need, right? If you're, a figure humanoid robot that's in the Amazon factory, like that's one thing. But if it's going to live with grandma, you need a whole different packaging around that. And how do you sell that and get people comfortable with it, especially for people who aren't necessarily native to these ideas, or this was solely science fiction? Like, how do you get them comfortable with that?
Right, that's I think the biggest thing, especially with all audiences, that's what they're facing. But with especially this group, there's got to be more concern than not. But it is interesting to me that this is not usually where these companies like figures start. Like it seems this is an audience that already is bringing in an outsourced worker to do this stuff for them that could be replaced by a robot, right? Whereas people our age generally aren't, right? But like that's always what you see in the demo. It's like really hip, cool apartment, and here's like the mood lighting. Yeah, like it's the better version of what people want to see. But you do wonder like that, like, is that really the wedge in? Here's a cheaper, more reliable solution that maybe can drive itself in a self-driving car every day to do the dishes and do the laundry and dust around.
I feel like that's having some experience with that, that's a tough, the at-home nurse kind of role, tough one to find good people, retain good people, probably a stepping stone. It's not where everyone wants to be, right? Hard to get really good people at that stay there and do it, right? And so for me, that's where it's like, that's the opportunity, right? It's hard finding people in that role, in that profession that love doing it, that want to keep doing it. It's usually, okay, I'm doing this so I can move on to something else, right? It's more of a stepping stone. So you get a more transient group, which
it's a group that spends money and has the problem,
right.
So like it lines up really well if you can solve the trust problem, or like maybe you have to design these things so they don't look like murder robots like they do today, and they look more like R2D2 or something that is like cute and friendly instead of like the black faceless ones we see that look like they're from Robot, that Will Smith movie.
There's I think you'll see a willingness with people who are becoming more and more limited over time. And I have a parent who's in this position where not easy for them to get around, not easy to do the laundry, not easy to do things around the house. And so the willingness of somebody in that position, even with family close by, right, to be able to have some assistance, I think, even though we I think correctly anticipate there being some trepidation with some of those folks, willing to accept that help, because it means prolonged independence. It means that they don't have to feel guilt or like a burden to the rest of their family. And these are all things that we'll all experience as we get older and need help from folks younger than us, or maybe more robots for us as we get older. So I think that can be overcome. Like the trepidation and the hesitancy that some folks will have, I think will be overcome.
Well, it's probably more what I was saying before, where how do you sell it to our age group and get us comfortable using it? And then it's kind of a natural progression where you send your robot over to help your parents out.
Yeah.
And
that actually makes way more sense to me, because like I don't have that many tasks that need to be done every day by a robot. I mean, there are things I would love that did the dishes and the laundry, but after an hour, it's done.
Right.
And what?
This is where I anticipate like the apartment that comes with a robot on the floor, and the robot can do everybody's dishes on the floor because there's plenty of time in the day for the robot to do that, vacuum everybody's floor, right, and so on and so forth. So like you're absolutely right. Like I think in the same way that vehicles spend most of their time parked, and so therefore self-driving vehicles make a lot of sense to maximize utilization. Some of the robotics will be the same thing. And I can imagine a situation where somebody lives in a 4-unit complex or a 4-unit building, and there's just a robot there that takes care of everybody, or an 8-unit building.
So we're selling robots to HOAs.
We're selling robots to HOAs. One per building, takes care of everything.
Well, I think there's a bigger trend with people our age as well, like willing to trade money for time. as well, right? So I think there's a big area of opportunity there as well. That I think as time goes on, I don't want to be spending my whole weekend. I'd rather be spending time with family, friends, my kids, whatever. If you're in youth sports, then you just don't have any time at all ever. I think there's going to be a willingness to people start to make that trade. And if you make it easy and you have those things that you used to have to do on your own or manage those services, like that becomes an interesting play. But the thing with the robots that I do worry about is, I think back to, I guess, 10 years ago now, 2016, there was the whole DNS DDoS that happened. And it was basically a bunch of refrigerators and ovens that got hacked and were able to like replicate and do massive denials of service to, bring giant sections of the internet down. Right. And so I think that's the other component is like, how good can you get on the tech to know that some foreign actor or foreign state hasn't taken over your robot and hacked it to do
up grandma's clothes.
That's right. Non-iRobot things.
Right. Well, as we learned from the documentary iRobot, when that happens, Dan, the light in their chest will turn red. And then you'll know that something bad is happening and the robot is now evil.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I'm glad they made that documentary.
Right. All right. So moving on, I think I'm going to bring up one thing that I have no idea if you guys are ready to talk about. Japan is very much the laboratory for all the things that the U.S. is experiencing today, but they started back in 2006, 2007, right? Super aged population with more than 20% of their population being over 65. And they've had to endure as a society a lot of the things that we're heading into with the baby boomers. And there are some things that are very direct correlations, or I would say very
parallel.
There's some things, thank you. There are some things that are direct parallels where there's fewer younger people than older people, and then some that are sort of interesting proxies, like people don't live necessarily near their parents, right? We have grown up in a generation where it's very common for people our age, and frankly for the generation, our parents' generation, to have moved away from their parents. And so in a situation where you may have 2 or 4 siblings, you may only have 1 or 2 of them that live nearby. And they have jobs because, to Nick's point earlier, they're in the sandwich generation. That society has had to deal with shortages in healthcare, just like we're going to have to deal with, a progression of dementia and other neurological conditions that happen to people as they age, and just generally taking care of them. They've had to do it without the benefits of what will hopefully be some of the new technologies that are heading our way.
In the longevity space, there's always the kind of the saying around, all you have to do is stay alive long enough and they will start having the technology to fix all of these other elements, right? And so, it's good that we're a follower and not needing to figure this out 20 years ago. But I think there is probably, it'll be a much different scenario for us where you now have AI and a lot of the advancements in medicine and other things that'll come along that'll either help, like from a cellular level, be able to like reprogram and rebuild and avoid some of these degenerative diseases. But I think kind of a lot of the stuff we were talking about coming down, whether it's robots or other type advancements, like we'll be able to take advantage of that. Right. And so kind of echoing it, like, let's just stay around long enough for these advancements to come save us all. So
I've read about Japan. I haven't pieced together what you're saying, but it makes total sense. So I think what's interesting about that is to look at how they've tried to solve problems, maybe not with technology, although it's an incredibly technological country, whether it's people that visit or different solutions they've done with essentially human beings, and then apply the AI layer to that to see like, okay, what can now be solved better in this near future with technology. So I think there is a potential good roadmap there, because there's other stuff we haven't even touched on, like the loneliness epidemic and other problems, right? Does AI make medicine better so people live longer? People already are living longer, and now that might be extended further. All of these things we've been dealing with and read about will continue and just expand. So, we need to start thinking about other ways you do that.
So going back to Japan, and what have they done to help address the issue that we're facing here in the United States? And one of the things that they had to do was make some regulatory changes, right? And those are topics that are a little bit difficult in this country today, but they passed a long-term care insurance policy within the country that provided a baseline of universal care for folks who are 65 and over to help alleviate the financial burden, help address the issues that people who did not have insurance, did not have family members to take care of them, were dealing with at the time. And so I would anticipate in the US, we're not there yet, but there are likely going to have to be some policy and regulatory changes that get put in place to make sure that those folks are supported and cared for as they get older.
Well, it's also, I mean, the big thing with Japan, who's kind of the poster child for the low replacement rate, right? And so there's a whole bunch of policies type stuff that I believe they're trying to do just around people having more children. And I think really the main thing isn't the people having 2+ children or 0 children. It's just the people who used to have 1 child are now having 0 children, which is kind of set off this, not just Japan. I mean, I think Korea is maybe just as bad or worse, and tons of other countries. And I think the US is on path for that. But a lot of it is just people. There's also people having children, women in the workforce, and being out and missing periods of work. And there's a lot of that kind of societal pressure that's being put on. And then if you're waiting till you're older to have kids, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in terms of fertility rates and like that are going on that are probably a kind of climate, or based on that, we're starting to have these compounding factors. And that's really one of the biggest issues, right? You don't have the amount of families with children. So it's how do you fix that? I mean, I think there's obviously technical advancements that have happened on the fertility side, but that's going to need to step up as well if this trend continues of people delaying until it's sometimes too late. So again, it's how do we stay around long enough to fix these issues, have the technology catch up?
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap up episode 10. Thanks a lot. And if you have not subscribed to this podcast, please hit that subscribe button so that you find out about episode 11 when we put that one up. Thanks a lot.